And so let's have a look now at this letter by Pontius Pilate to Tiberius Caesar about his experience of meeting Jesus.
Pilate's report. To Tiberius Caesar, Emperor of Rome, noble sovereign greeting. The events of the last few days in my province have been of such character that I will give in detail in full as they occurred, as I should not be surprised if, in the course of time, they may change the destiny of our nation. For it seems of late that all the gods have ceased to be propitious. I am almost ready to say, cursed be the day that I succeeded Valerius Flaccus in the government of Judea, for since then my life has been one of continual uneasiness and distress. On my arrival at Jerusalem, I took possession of the praetorium and ordered a splendid feast to be prepared, to which I invited the Tetrarch of Galilee, with the high priest and his officers. At the appointed hour no guest appeared. This I considered as an insult offered my dignity and to the whole government which I represent. A few days after the high priest deigned to pay me a visit. His deportment was grave and deceitful. He pretended his religion forbade him and his attendants to sit at the table of Romans, and eat and offer libations with them. But this was only a sanctimonious seeming, for his very countenance betrayed his hypocrisy. Although I found it expedient to accept his excuse, from that moment I was convinced that the conquered had declared themselves enemies of the conquerors, and I would warn the Romans to beware of the high priests of this country. They would betray their own mother to gain office and luxurious living. It seems to me that, of conquered cities, Jerusalem is the most difficult to govern. So turbulent are the people that I live in momentary dread of an insurrection. I have not soldiers sufficient to suppress it, yet I endeavored to ascertain as far as I could the mind and standing of the people. Among the various rumors that came to my ears, there was one in particular that attracted my attention. A young man, it was said, had appeared in Galilee, preaching with a noble unction a new law in the name of the God that had sent him. At first I was apprehensive that its design was to stir up the people against the Romans, but my fears were soon dispelled. Jesus of Nazareth spoke rather as a friend of the Romans than of the Jews. One day, in passing by the place of Silo, where there was a great concourse of people, I observed in the midst of the group a young man who was leaning against a tree, calmly addressing the multitude. I was told it was Jesus. This I could easily have suspected, so great was the difference between him and those listening to him. His golden-colored hair and beard gave to his appearance a celestial aspect. He appeared to be about 30 years of age. Never have I seen a sweeter or more serene countenance. What a contrast between him and his hearers with their black beards and tawny complexions. Unwilling to interrupt him by my presence, I continued my walk, but signified my secretary to join the group and listen. My secretary's name is Manlius. Manlius has been for a long time an inhabitant of Judea, and is well acquainted with the Hebrew language. He was devoted to me and worthy of my confidence. On entering the praetorium, I found Manlius, who related to me the words Jesus had pronounced at Silo. Never have I read in the works of the philosophers anything that can compare to the maxims of Jesus. One of the rebellious Jews, so numerous in Jerusalem, having asked Jesus if it was lawful to give tribute to Caesar, he replied, "Render unto Caesar the things that belong to Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's." It was on account of the wisdom of his sayings that I granted so much liberty to the Nazarene. For it was in my power to have him arrested and exiled to Pontus, but it would have been contrary to the justice which has always characterized the Roman government in all its dealings with men. This man was neither seditious nor rebellious. I extended to him my protection, unknown perhaps to himself. He was at liberty to act, to speak, to assemble, and to address the people, and to choose his disciples, unrestrained by any praetorian mandate. Should it ever happen, may the gods avert the omen, should it ever happen, I say, that the religion of our forefathers will be supplanted by the religion of Jesus, it will be to this noble toleration that Rome shall owe her premature death, while I, miserable wretch, will have been the instrument of what the Jews call providence and what we call destiny. This unlimited freedom granted to Jesus provoked the Jews. Not the poor, but the rich and powerful. It is true. Jesus was severe on the latter, and this was a political reason, in my opinion, for not restraining the liberty of the Nazarene. "Scribes and Pharisees," he would say to them, "you are a race of vipers. You resemble painted sepulchres. You appear well unto men, but you have death within you." At other times he would sneer at the alms of the rich and proud, telling them that the mite of the poor was more precious in the sight of God. Complaints were daily made at the praetorium against the insolence of Jesus.
And so I'm cutting this letter of Pontius Pilate short just to the relevant parts. And here we see that Pontius Pilate was saying that Jesus was speaking to the multitude in Hebrew, not Aramaic, as we're taught by the false teachers in the Catholic and Judeo-Christian churches today. Because calling Jesus a Jew is like calling a Catholic a Protestant, or a Protestant a Catholic, because he opposed the Pharisees, and he didn't speak their language, and he didn't even have their religion, and he wasn't of the same race as them either. And so the worst offender of this, of course, was Mel Gibson's movie The Passion, which is totally in Aramaic.
Hey, Malkutak.
Min mandi malkinate. Anachli.
Antabar Nagaryetia.
And there were 3 signs put up at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, reading in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, not Aramaic. And another thing that Pontius Pilate said was that Jesus had golden hair and a golden beard. And so the way that Hollywood portrays Jesus and the disciples today as Jews is completely incorrect, because he was a white man. And so let's have a look now at the rest of Pontius Pilate's letter.
The Pharisees were avowed enemies of Jesus. They cared not for the government. They bore with bitterness the severe reprimands which the Nazarene had for 3 years had been continually giving them wherever he went. They had embraced the quarrels of the Herodians and Sadducees. Besides these 3 parties, I had to contend against the reckless and profligate populace. Jesus was dragged before the high priest and condemned to death. It was then that the high priest Caiaphas performed a divisory act of submission. He sent his prisoner to me to confirm his condemnation and secure his execution. I answered him that, as Jesus was a Galilean, the affair came under Herod's jurisdiction, and ordered him to be sent thither. The wily tetrarch professed humility, and protesting his deference to the lieutenant of Caesar, he committed the fate of the man to my hands. Soon my palace assumed the aspect of a besieged citadel. Every moment increased the number of malcontents. Jerusalem was inundated with crowds from the mountains of Nazareth. All Judea appeared to be pouring into the city. I had taken a wife from among the Gauls, who pretended to see into futurity. Weeping and throwing herself at my feet, she said to me, "Beware, beware, and touch not that man, for he is holy." Last night I saw him in a vision. He was walking on the waters. He was flying on the wings of the wind. He spoke to the tempest and to the fishes of the lake. All were obedient to him. Behold, the statues of Caesar are filled with Gemini. The columns of the Inturium have given away, and the sun is veiled in mourning like a vestal in the tomb. Ah, Pilate, evil awaits thee. If thou wilt not listen to the vows of thy wife, dread the curse of the Roman Senate. Dread the frowns of Caesar. By this time the marble stairs groaned under the weight of the multitude. The Nazarene was brought back to me. I proceeded to the halls of justice, followed by my guard, and asked the people in a severe tone what they demanded. The death of the Nazarene, was the reply. For what crime? He has blasphemed. He has prophesied the ruin of the temple. He calls himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. Roman justice, said I, punishes not such offenses with death. Crucify him, cried the relentless rabble. The vociferations of the infuriated mob shook the palace to its foundations. There was but one who appeared to be calm in the midst of the vast multitude. It was the Nazarene. After many fruitless attempts to protect him from the fury of his merciless persecutors, I adopted a measure which at the moment appeared to me to be the only one that could save his life. I proposed, as it was their custom to deliver a prisoner on such occasions, to release Jesus and let him go free, that he might be the scapegoat, as they called it. But they said Jesus must be crucified. But they still cried, "Crucify him, crucify him." I then ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping this might satisfy him, but it only increased their fury. I then called for a basin and washed my hands in the presence of the clamorous multitude, thus testifying that in my judgment Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving death, but in vain. It was his life these wretches thirsted for. Often in our civil commotions I have witnessed this furious anger of the multitude, but nothing could be compared to what I witnessed on this occasion. It might have been truly said that all the phantoms of the infernal regions had assembled at Jerusalem. The crowd appeared not to walk, but to be borne off and whirled as a vortex, rolling along in living waters, By degrees the day darkened like a winter's twilight, such as had been at the death of the great Julius Caesar, dragging to execution the innocent Nazarene. All around me was deserted. Jerusalem had vomited forth her indwellers through the funeral gate that leads to Germanica. An air of desolation and sadness enveloped me. My guards had joined the cavalry, and the centurion, with a display of power, was endeavoring to keep order. I was left alone, and my breaking heart admonished me that what was passing at that moment appertained rather to the history of the gods than of men. A loud clamor was heard proceeding from Golgotha, which, borne on the winds, seemed to announce an agony such as was never heard by mortal ears. Dark clouds lowered over the pinnacle of the temple, and setting over the city as covered as a veil. So dreadful were the signs that men saw both in the heavens and on earth, that Dionysius the Areopagite is reported to have explained, either the author of nature is suffering, or the universe is falling apart. Whilst these appalling scenes of nature were transpiring, there was a dreadful earthquake in Lower Egypt, which filled everybody with fear, and scared the superstitious Jews almost to death. Near the first hour of the night, I threw my mantle around me, and went down into the city towards the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice was consummated. The crowd was returning home, still agitated. What they had witnessed had stricken them with terror and remorse. I also saw my little Roman cohort pass by mournfully, the standard-bearer having veiled his eagle in token of grief. And I overheard some of the Jewish soldiers murmuring strange words which I did not understand. Others were recounting miracles very like those which have so often smitten the Romans by the will of the gods. Sometimes groups of men and women would balk, then looking back toward Mount Calvary, would remain motionless in expectation of witnessing some new prodigy. I returned to the praetorium, sad and pensive. On ascending the stairs, the steps of which were still stained with the blood of the Nazarene, I perceived an old man in a suppliant posture, and behind him several Romans in tears. He threw himself at my feet and wept most bitterly. It is painful to see an old man weep, and my heart already being overcharged with grief, we, those strangers, wept together. And in truth it seemed that the tears lay very shallow that day, with many whom I perceived in the vast concourse of people. I have never witnessed such an extreme revulsion of feeling. Those who betrayed and sold him, those who testified against him, those who cried, "Crucify him, we have his blood," all slunk off like cowardly curs and washed their teeth with vinegar. As I am told that Jesus taught resurrection and separation after death, "Father," said I to him, after gaining control of my feeling, "who are you, and what is your request?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," replied he, "and I am come to beg you, upon my knees, permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." "Your prayer is granted," said I to him, and at the same time I ordered Manlius to take some soldiers with him to superintend the interment, lest it should be profaned. A few days after the sepulchre was found empty, his disciples proclaimed all over the country that Jesus had risen from the dead, as he had foretold. This created more excitement even than the crucifixion. As to its truth I cannot say for certain, but I have made some investigations of the matter, so you can examine for yourself and see if I am at fault, as Herod represents. Joseph buried Jesus in his own tomb. The day after he was buried, one of the priests came to the praetorium and said they were apprehensive that his disciples intended to steal the body of Jesus and hide it, and then make it appear that he had risen from the dead, as he had foretold. I sent him to the captain of the royal guard, Malchus, to tell him to take the Jewish soldiers, place as many around the sepulchre as were needed, then if anything should happen they could blame themselves and not the Romans. When the great excitement arose about the sepulchre being found empty, I felt a deeper solicitude than ever. I sent for Malchus, who told me he had placed his lieutenant, Ben Isham, with 100 soldiers around the sepulchre. He told me that Isham and the soldiers were very much alarmed at what had occurred there that morning. I sent for this man Isham, who related to me, as near as I can recollect, the following. He said that at about the beginning of the 4th watch they saw a soft and beautiful light over the sepulchre. He at first thought that the women had come to embalm the body of Jesus, as was their custom, but he could not see how they could have gotten through the guards. While these thoughts were passing through his mind, behold, the whole place was lighted up, and there seemed to be crowds of the dead in their grave clothes. All seemed to be shouting and filled with ecstasy, while all around and above was the most beautiful music he had ever heard, and the whole air seemed to be full of voices praising God. At this time there seemed to be a reeling and spinning of the earth, so that he turned so sick and faint that he could not stand on his feet. He said the earth seemed to swim from under him, and that his senses left him, so that he knew not what did occur. I asked him how long the scene had lasted. He said he did not know, but he thought nearly an hour. He said it was hid by the light of day. I asked him if he went into the sepulchre after he had come to himself. He said no, because he was afraid. Just as soon as the relief came, they all went to their quarters. I asked him if he had been questioned by the priest, and he said he had. They wanted him to say it was an earthquake, and that they were asleep, and offered him money to say that the disciples came and stole Jesus. But he saw no disciples. He did not know that the body was gone until he was told. He could convert water into wine. He could change death into life, disease into health. He could calm the seas, still the storms, call up fish with a silver coin in its mouth. Now I say, if he could do all these things, which he did, and many more, as the Jews all testify, and it was doing these things that created the enmity against him, he was not charged with criminal offenses, nor was he charged with violating any law, nor of wrongdoing any individual in person, and all these facts are known to thousands, as well by his foes as by his friends. I am almost ready to say, as did Manulus at the cross, truly this was the Son of God. Now, noble sovereign, this is as near the facts in the case as I can arrive at, and I have taken pains to make the statement very full, so that you may judge of my conduct upon the whole, as I hear the Antipater has said many hard things of me in this matter. With the promise of faithfulness and good wishes to my noble sovereign, I am your most obedient servant, Pontius Pilate.
And so after Pontius Pilate wrote that letter to Tiberius Caesar, he then put a copy in the library at Jerusalem for the public record. And likewise other important letters were put in the public library by Gamaliel and also Nicodemus, and they became part of what's known as the Archko Volumes, which are found in the Vatican Library today.